And with me now is Andrew Weissmann. He was a senior prosecutor on the Mueller team and currently a professor at NYU Law. So, Andrew, thanks for being here. Last-minute pardons are normal. All presidents do them. They do hundreds of them at a time. What would be out of the norm for President Trump to do today or potentially tomorrow?
What is normal is for pardons to proceed in a traditional process where everybody is heard, the Department of Justice, defense lawyers, and the people who are most worthy are given pardons. That is not what we have seen with Donald Trump. He has completely shut out the Department of Justice and the pardon attorney and just makes the decisions on his own, which is why you're seeing so many stories about the sort of selling of pardons, which, you know, as a history major, sounds a lot like the selling of indulgences in the medieval times. And so everyone, I think, is going to be focused very much on what he does with respect to his family, and even if he pardons himself. But I do think that it's important. Right now, we know his documented pardons with respect to scores of people at the end of December, and those consist of murderers, fraudsters, corrupt politicians, corrupt law enforcement. I mean, it really is a rogues gallery. And to tie this into your clip of Nancy Pelosi, this is really a president who has no respect for his own constitutional powers and the history of the presidency. One
of those corrupt politicians is Sheldon Silver, here in New York State, who was sentenced to 6 years in prison on corruption charges. Let me talk to you about pardoning himself, because all the speculation about what Trump would do in his final days for months was about him pardoning himself, pardoning his adult kids, pardoning Rudy Giuliani, et cetera. It seems like he has pulled back from that. What could he have been told to make it clear to him that would not be worth it?
Well, I've always been of the view that he is going to do it. We'll see if I'm right in the next day or so. But I think that the counter argument that people have been putting a bug in his ear about is that if he were to do that, that it would increase the chances of a federal investigation of the president, because you could imagine Merrick Garland, the incoming attorney general, thinking this is something that we cannot sort of leave untested, that we need to be able to have a court decision on whether this is really something that is encompassed in the presidency, because it would be such a dangerous thing for a president to think that they have this power, that you can imagine the attorney general needing to go forward. And one point on this, Katie, I'd like to make is a lot of people think it would only be subject to challenge if the president were then indicted. And I don't think that's right. I think that the attorney general could open an investigation into the president, and then the president, now the former president, could say, no, I pardon myself. And the issue would then be ripe early on for there to be a Supreme Court decision on whether that is something that is actually within the president's power.
That is interesting. And it's always prudent to never predict what Donald Trump will or will not do. One other thing, the former Attorney General, Bill Barr, sat down with ITV News. This is a British news station with a journalist named Rohit Kachru. And he said the president's claims of election fraud precipitated the D.C. riots, though he did say he would leave it to investigators to decide if the president incited the riot. Maybe we're reading too much into this. Does this sound like a muted message to the incoming attorney general if he is confirmed, Merrick Garland?
I read this as this was the attorney general trying to resurrect his reputation. I found it a little hard to listen to when he was fomenting the idea of election fraud prior to the election and issued all sorts of statements and policies to soften the ground for what Donald Trump then did. So I find it a little to say the least, ironic to hear him now saying this. And I don't think Merrick Garland is going to be taking advice or opinions from Attorney General Barr.
So it did certainly help it along before the election. Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
We're going to watch out for what happens in the next 20 hours or so.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.